I'm using a large brush and I'm using water to wet the background. I'm going to be painting wet on wet. I'm using 300 grams rough watercolour paper on block. I'm dropping in a little bit of violet here, wet in wet, with my size 14 round brush. And I'm going to drop in a little bit of Cinnerous blue. You can use cerulean, and I'm just dropping that into some spaces that I can see there. So it's to create a really kind of lovely colourful background with all these blues and violets. This is some ultramarine, and you can use cobalt blue as well. I'm just painting around the owl now, really just to make sure that there's a dark and light effect here, so he really stands out with this lovely ultramarine blue. Still using the size 14 brush, working wet into wet. I've just got a little pinch of cobalt violet light there. You can just add a touch more pink permanent rose to your ultramarine blue, working wet into wet here, and you know, just to really create this sort of darkish background around the owl to make the owl stand out, because the owl is the focal point here, and I really want to make the owl look snowy and white, so making a darker background will really achieve this. So as you can see here, I'm just painting some negative shapes in between the foliage here, using some of the ultramarine, a little bit of the Cinnerous blue there, and a little bit of the violet as well. This is wet on dry, and remember, I've actually masked out a lot of the snow, so I'm freely painting here and there, and I'm going to paint darker green foliage, so don't worry too much about painting over the green. I'm just softening some of the edges here so the owl doesn't look like a cutout or a jigsaw puzzle piece, and this creates a little bit more depth because you're softening the edges. And I'm using my size 14 brush, and it's a damp brush, not too wet, to control and soften that edge. I'm sprinkling table salt all over the painting now, and this will create a beautiful background. It'll absorb the paint, creating a frosty sort of effect, really making that background look very wintry. I'm going to allow that salt to dry naturally. That's the best way in order for it to work. And look at that result. I am delighted with it. It looks gorgeous. All that texture. It really does look like frost in the trees there. I am painting the owl's eyes wet on dry with some lemon yellow with my size 4 brush. I've added a little bit of red to that yellow to create an orangey colour, and I've dropped a little bit of an orangey colour in the owl's eyes, damp into damp. I'm painting the beak wet on dry with my size 4 brush with some Paynes grey. If you don't have Paynes grey, you could use black, or you could mix ultramarine with some burnt sienna. I am painting some shadows on to the owl here using some of the background colours. It'll create lots of harmony, and it's such beautiful sort of colours in the white sort of feathers there. So it's a little bit of Cinnerous blue, a tiny touch of Paynes grey mixed with the Cinnerous blue, and some ultramarine here, just softening it with my size 14 round brush there. I've mixed up a very dilute Venetian red with a touch of the Paynes grey here. You could use burnt sienna with a touch of Paynes grey, and I'm just painting this very sort of light dilute colour wet on dry with my size 14 brush, and just creating the look of the feathers right at the bottom here, leaving some white as well. Don't overdo this. Remember, in watercolour, less is more. I'm just painting a little bit of shadow colour around the face of the owl, still using my size 14 brush here, and just very sort of dilute background colours again, a little bit of violet with a touch of the Paynes grey there as well, just for these soft shadow colours. And just a reminder, watercolour does dry lighter, so sometimes it may look scary and dark, but it really does dry a lot paler. So sometimes it's worth taking that risk and painting slightly darker than you feel comfortable, and hopefully you'll get the right shade once your painting has dried. This is some Paynes grey working damp into wet here, still using my size 14 brush. I've just rinsed my brush there, and I'm softening with the damp brush there and diluting out so I don't get any hard edges. I'm going to allow my painting to dry again, And what I'm doing now is I am removing the masking fluid. I'm using a paper towel to remove the masking fluid. You can use a putty rubber as well, but you can see there now it's really reserved the white and light of the paper. So I've got lots of little sort of circles there, but also the snow on the foliage as well, and a little bit of light and white on the owl's feathers as well. I have mixed up some dark green. I've used forest green with a touch of burnt umber, but you could use yellow with some Prussian blue, or Prussian blue with some burnt umber as well. I'm working wet on dry here using my size 8 brush and just painting in these sort of thin sort of leaves here, really lovely dark green. Try to paint less is more here. You don't have to paint too much detail here, and try to just paint once. Don't overwork. It's easy to overwork things, but everything always looks so much fresher when you just paint once in watercolour and just carry on just painting these marks, trying to vary them, and look at the photograph and see, you know, sort of the direction of the leaves are going in, etc. And it really can look quite effective. I'm painting the darks in the owl's eye, his pupil, trying to avoid the little highlight there as well, so it's the light in his eyes. And I'm going to paint an outline of this Paynes grey with my size 4 brush, working wet on dry. I'm using the size 4 brush now, and I'm just painting some very sort of light grey sort of marks on the feathers there, just to sort of really describe some of the soft shadows on the owl's face, especially around the eyes as well. It can be so effective, just these little details working wet on dry. I'm actually painting some dark marks on the feathers there, sort of middle of the owl down towards the bottom there, and it really is quite effective. I quite like the salt as well on the left hand side of the owl, works really well. So it's just making these little markings here. You can use some Paynes grey, a little bit of burnt umber, and it just brings the owl to life. I've just mixed up a little bit of violet there with a tiny touch of Paynes grey, and I'm just sort of painting in some shadows in the bottom feathers there with my size 4 brush. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry. Once your painting has dried, you can start painting some shadows on the snow. I'm just sort of painting it beneath the snow, so the top of the snow I'm going to try and leave as best I can white, but it just sort of brings everything together with the foliage there, pulls everything together, and it's actually a really pretty colour. Now, I felt that the owl wasn't coming forward enough. Now yours might do, so you may not need to do this, but I've mixed up some ultramarine blue here with a tiny touch of violet. I'm working wet on dry with my size 10 brush and just painting on the right hand side of the owl there. I've just diluted my size 14 brush with clean water, and I'm just softening that hard edge and blending it into the background. And as you can see there, the owl sort of comes forward a little bit more. It's just a nice way of working to create depth in a painting, and I'm just softening this right hand side of the owl and sprinkling a little table salt. I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally in order for the salt to work to create a lovely yummy background frosty effect. I'm using a circle stencil here with a sponge and some clean water, and I'm lifting off some white circles similar to those in the photograph. The technique in the photograph is called Bokeh, and I'm using that same technique in watercolour painting, or trying to, so I'm lifting off circles. If you don't have a stencil, you can use a sort of bristle brush or something like that and work in a circular way just to lift off the paint, because watercolour's not permanent. And as you can see here, I'm working away with my sponge. I dab it with my paper towel to lift off any excess liquid, and then dab again, and you've got this lovely light circle, and it just creates a magical background effect. So you've got that with the wet and wet, the salt, the masked out circles, and now this lovely sort of lifting out where you get a softer edge circle works so well. Some colours stain a little bit more, so you have to work at it a little bit more, but don't worry about leaving a pale stained blue or pinky colour there, because it also looks quite effective. The other thing I'm doing is I'm lifting off a variety of different size circles. It's quite effective there, and it gives the same look that that gorgeous photograph has given as well. You can paint as many of those as you like, as long as you don't lift off all of the background. What I'm going to do now is I'm using some white gouache. You can use white watercolour or white acrylics, and I'm going to spatter this background. I'm using my size 10 brush, and this is the last technique I'm using for this background, so it really does make it look so interesting on so many sort of levels, using all these lovely textured techniques. I'm removing the washi tape now to reveal a really nice white border, and it gives me time to assess to see if I need to do any more to this painting. I think I'll leave it there for now. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, not just painting the snowy owl, but that gorgeous background using all of those different yummy textured techniques. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put them in the comments section below, and if you'd like to see more tutorials like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. For those of you who'd like to learn more about watercolour, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about that can be found on the screen or in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.